Hey folks, today we're going to spend some time talking about consent, which also means we're inevitably talking a lot about rape and sexual assault, and trigger warning is what I'm getting at. Are you comfortable? Good. Part the first. Rape. A really brief context. It's important to note that rape wasn't always the same type of concept or crime as we see it today, or at least as I, for example, as a Belgian person see it today, because it's not the same type of crime everywhere in the world currently. Many of us nowadays will view rape as a crime against the person, but that wasn't always and still isn't everywhere the case. Rape was and is in some places still seen as a property crime or as a crime against morality, most notably chastity. In this context, the victim isn't so much the person who is raped, but rather their father or their husband or society and its moral standards. This means a few things. For example, raping widows or prostitutes or women who are otherwise considered promiscuous wasn't really a biggie. This also means there is often a responsibility on the person who is raped to prevent this crime from being committed against someone or something that isn't actually them. Women were often held responsible or complicit in their rape if it was judged that they had enticed their rapist or if they hadn't done enough to defend themselves. The fact that rape did take place sometimes even served as proof that they had insufficiently resisted. Ever wonder where these attitudes of victim blaming come from? Ever wonder why it took so long for marital rape to actually become a thing, if it even is a thing in your area? Yeah. It was 2007 when a Philadelphia judge considered the at gunpoint gang rape of a prostitute theft of services rather than rape. Anyway, all of that also means that sexual consent wasn't always, and in some places still isn't, what many of us consider it to be today. In the context of rape as a property crime or a crime against morality, consent isn't really something that has to be given by the person that you want to have sex with. It is the approval of their father, of their husband, of a person that is considered to have ownership over them, or the moral approval of society. Part the second. Consent when rape is considered a crime against the person. Most of us today hopefully consider rape to be wrong, not because it infringes on someone else's ownership of another human being, or because it infringes on some moral standard like chastity or the demand that sex be significant. That means that it is considered something that is reserved for people who are in love and that it is considered a physical manifestation of that love. But because it's actually harmful to the person it's happening to. We consider a person harmed and therefore sex to be rape in the absence of that person's consent. Consent is the freely given permission for a sexual act to take place. To forgo consent is to disrespect that person's will and autonomy. When we don't seek people's permission to act upon their bodies, we're basically denying their personhood. In the words of Immanuel Kant, people are ends in themselves. They have their own goals and desires. They are not mere means for you to use to reach your goals and desires. To ignore consent is to treat people as tools, as objects with which to achieve your own purpose, regardless of their autonomous will. To ignore consent is to rob people of the control over their own bodies and boundaries. What it tells people is that what you care about is yourself, that their will is irrelevant, that they are irrelevant. And let me tell you, that shit hurts and it can be very traumatizing. Part the third, legality. Of course, legal definitions of rape and consent will vary between country, but I'd say that in the scope of what I'm trying to say here, what is technically legal and what isn't is actually largely irrelevant. When you consider not raping somebody to be staying within the bounds of what is legally permissible, what you're basically trying to do is just keep your own ass out of legal trouble. It's not really a concern for wanting to treat people right, because simply not all harm is covered by the law. And I dare say that even if it was, morally speaking, you should seek to treat people right because you care and because you think they deserve to be treated right, not because you want to keep your ass out of jail. I think we need to move this conversation about rape away from rape is wrong because it's illegal and towards how can we avoid causing other people harm. For everything that I see people share that they have experienced as abusive or harmful, there is always a couple of pundits who come into, well, actually, about how it's not technically illegal or a legally grey area at best. So, well, I mean, step away. Harm is not simply synonymous to against the law. Stop bullshitting about people expanding the legal definitions of rape. Start listening to why they feel harmed, and stop being an asshole about being asked to consider other people's well-being and how your actions may affect that. Stop erring on the side of I don't want to go to jail and start erring on the side of I don't want to hurt my partners and I want them to feel respected and have a good time. So from here on out, when we're talking about what constitutes consent and what is rape, we are abandoning the legal framework and we're going to focus on how we can avoid doing harm. Part the fourth, understanding consent. Understanding consent is a key element of our ability to avoid harm, whether it is because we know and understand which actions might be potentially harmful so we can avoid those, or by our ability to not misjudge other people's experiences of harm as benign. So in our society, we often still consider consent as the absence of a hard no, and I'm going to talk about why that's actually pretty insufficient. So in everyday communication, no is a disfavored response when expressing refusal. What that means is that people are very unlikely to explicitly say no to suggestions or activities they don't wish to accept or partake in. A direct no is often considered very harsh and impolite, and it is quite common for people to use soft refusals instead. Soft refusals are statements which express no either through avoiding outright acceptance or by finding excuses or explanations for why an offer can't be accepted. Avoidance could take the form of hesitation or uncertainty, leaving the clear answer in the middle. Things like, I'm not sure, let me think about it, or maybe. It can also take the form of having to avoid accepting an offer right now. Things such as, not right now, maybe later, some other time. An example of excuses and explanations might be something like, I've already had 3 cups of coffee and if I have a 4th one I'll get too jittery, or I'd love to stay but it's already so late I should really be getting home. People normally understand such forms of communication as expressing I do not want this thing that you're offering to me right now. Also in sexual communication. Now when it comes to sexual interaction, ignoring or pushing boundaries on any form of refusal that isn't an outright no is a frequently used tactic by sexual predators. They prey on this social norm that a hard no is required to express a lack of consent, to construct a narrative of ambiguity around their own actions. They may argue things like that they have simply misunderstood, that the person who was harmed was simply being unclear in their communication. Note that this is often a deliberate form of deception. It's designed to gaslight people who are harmed into doubting their own experiences, and it's designed for abusers to garner sympathy from their environment by portraying their actions as just a mistake, or for even outright claiming that the person they harmed is lying because they didn't say no, so obviously they consented. Sexual predators are also inclined to test their target's ability to eventually explicitly say no when they're pushed on soft refusals. This tends to happen by checking a target's responses in a non-sexual setting, such as offering them a drink or asking them to dance, and then pushing the boundaries when those offers are politely declined. If a person is likely to eventually give in out of discomfort or as not to appear rude, it is far less likely for them to eventually explicitly say no when sexual boundaries are crossed. Giving in to more benign offers like that before an assault or before an attempted assault also serves to make the target feel guilty and complicit by allegedly leading their abuser on. It is really important to remember that these actions and their consequences are not the fault of the person who is harmed. Abusers often know what they are doing, and they tend to deliberately target people who are less assertive, whether that is because of socialization or because of previous trauma. The responsibility for this lies solely with the abuser. Their targets are not at fault for having normal human responses. It needs to be remarked here that people assigned female at birth are at somewhat of an increased disadvantage. That is not to say that this can't be a problem for people assigned male at birth, but stereotypes associated with femininity cause AFAB people socialization. Listen, I have done this take like 8 times now and I can't manage to say socialization. So AFAB people's socialization is more focused, or tends to be more focused, on politeness, compliance, conflict avoidance, while there is a decreased focus on assertiveness. There, I did it. It is, however, important to note that we do live in a culture that promotes some ambiguous messaging around sex and sexual communication. There does exist this stereotype that women play hard to get and that they need warming up and that they need some convincing, which makes it seem like it's acceptable to push through their refusal, even if it is explicit. There's also a stereotype about men that they are allegedly always up for sex, so if they refuse, they can't really be refusing sex because they always want to have it. So it might be okay to push on that too. This can leave both men and women in a catch-22, where we require them to explicitly refuse, but simultaneously render their refusal meaningless. By no means does everybody buy into these stereotypes, but it would be foolish to assume that absolutely no one's actions could be influenced by them. And that might leave us in situations where some people might not be aware that their actions are actually pretty harmful. Not everyone who harms someone in this way is deliberately a potentially serial abuser. It needs to be said, though, that unintentional harm, still harm. A lack of intent to do harm doesn't suddenly diminish or negate that harm. When you run someone over because you were briefly looking down to change the channel on your radio, you're still accountable for that. You probably didn't think that your actions would be causing harm, and you certainly didn't set out to do harm. You still did. And it still counts. All harm, intentional or unintentional, deserves acknowledgement and consideration. When someone tells you that you have harmed them and you know that you didn't intend to, and maybe you don't really think that you actually did, don't be dismissive and defensive. Listen, because there is a good chance that you do have something to apologize for, to reflect on, and to learn from, so that you can prevent doing harm to other people in the future. Either way, now that we've talked about why no is a pretty insufficient model by which to establish the presence of consent, let's talk about the alternative. Yes means yes. What we mean by yes means yes is that consent should be more than the absence of a no. It shouldn't be hesitant, it shouldn't be any form of maybe, it needs to be active, enthusiastic, and ongoing. Put away the contract, sweetie. Nobody asked you to do that. Besides, consent can be revoked at any time during sexual activity, so it's not like a contract that was signed prior to the start of sexual activity is gonna do you much good in that scenario. Also, you're looking for how not to get your ass landed in prison again, and that's not what we're here for. There is actually a chapter on this in my book titled Feminazi, link in the nether regions, if you want that. Good practice when applying yes means asking or offering opportunity for a response. Are you up for this? Do you want this? I want to do XYZ thing with you. Is this okay? How does this feel? Look for a response. If you ask for permission or express a desire and your partner fails to actually communicate with you and respond, don't assume. This doesn't mean having to get an explicit verbal yes for every little micro interaction. I mean, when you're making out, you probably don't have to stop to ask if you can put your hand on your partner's hip. Yes, have verbal communication, especially at initiation and when moving on to bigger, significantly more intimate actions, but alongside that, you should be attentive to your partner's behavior and body language. Are they actively participating? Are they leaning in? Are they laughing, smiling, visibly enjoying themselves, pulling you in closer? If your partner seems disengaged or hesitant, or you're not sure, stop and check in. You can just say something like, hey, you seem hesitant or distracted or insecure. Is everything all right? And get a response to that too. It is a good idea to have conversations with your partner about do's, don'ts, desires, hang-ups, what consent means in the dynamic of your relationship, whatever type of relationship that might be, and to do so outside of sexual activity. It helps you gain a deeper understanding of each other's boundaries, communication style and needs, and it makes it a lot easier to get the fun stuff right when it comes down to it. There are, however, circumstances in which yes isn't actually yes. Remember that consent has to be freely given, and there are a range of factors that might infringe on a person's ability to do so. Factors such as age, threat, coercion, deception, and for those of you who are now saying, God, why does it have to be this hard? Be not afraid. This video is over, but you can leave any questions and comments in the comment section below. And I am going to get to all of these factors which make yes, maybe technically not a yes, in the next video. Love you. Bye. These credits are currently empty, but hopefully they won't have to stay that way for long. I now have a Patreon page, so if you thought this video was interesting or that it makes for a good contribution to society, consider dropping me $1 or $2 to help me pay for rent. You can find the link in the nether regions. Thanks!